While employed at HMP Oakwood in Staffordshire, England, 27-year-old prison officer Katie Loxton became romantically involved with inmate Adam Higgs. The illicit relationship lasted for roughly 6 months leading up to Loxton's arrest. On January the 27th of 2022, prison staff had alerted law enforcement after noticing that the woman was spending a significant amount of time on Higgs's block. The couple would communicate through a cell phone that the inmate had hidden in his cell. Investigators found that they'd been able to manipulate the security measures of the prison telephony system to hide their relationship from officers and inmates. Throughout their tryst, they'd spoken on the phone for more than 380 hours in 3,451 different calls, with many of them being of an intimate nature. Following Loxton's arrest, the police also found 3 handwritten letters from Higgs at the woman's home. Loxton admitted misconduct in a public office and was jailed for 12 months in August of 2023. The pair also pleaded guilty to transmitting or causing the transmission of an image or sound by electronic means from within a prison, and Higgs was handed an 8-month sentence for having the contraband cell phone. Number 8. Maana Milo. Hawaii woman Maana Milo was put on probation after admitting to stealing a luxury handbag from a Neiman Marcus in 2014. On July the 22nd of 2016, the transgender woman was carrying out a community service order at a park in Honolulu in exchange for having her criminal record expunged. On what was her 4th day on the job, Milo secretly recorded her supervisor on Facebook Live as he made advances towards her. The live-streamed series covered roughly 30 minutes of conversation, during which the supervisor, 47-year-old Harold Villanueva Jr., spoke to Milo inappropriately as he drove her around the park grounds in his truck. He was heard bragging about community service trysts, which included one young mother to whom Villanueva referred to as the best I had in a long time. He told Milo that she could leave early in exchange for performing intimate favors. 21-year-old Milo also reported that the supervisor had tried to hold her hand in addition to pinching and slapping her buttocks while she was cleaning park bathrooms. The footage went viral in the aftermath, and Milo also tagged the Honolulu Police Department in her posts, leading to Villanueva's arrest for 4th-degree assault. Milo subsequently took the videos down because she faced backlash from online users who accused her of egging the man on. Milo, however, justified her actions by saying that she was fearful for her safety and of not completing her court-ordered service, and thus chose to pretend that she was going along with Villanueva's propositions. Number 7. Rockan Walker. In 2021, prison officer Rockan Walker started working at HMP Berwyn in Wrexham, North Wales. Between May and October of that year, colleagues became concerned that she was often in the presence of and inappropriately close to inmate Daniel Carter. Walker, who was married at the time, had told other staff members that Carter was her type, and on one occasion, she was captured on CCTV stroking his arm and laughing while they were speaking closely. After she was reported, Walker was questioned during a support meeting in August, but insisted that while it looked dodgy, her relationship with Carter was purely platonic. When the inmate's use of the prison's phone system was investigated, it emerged that he'd added a contact, Leanna Baker, to his list, and the name would subsequently be proven to have been an alias for Walker. The authorities found that there'd been numerous calls made between them, in which they'd engaged in explicit conversations and talked about going away together. During the investigation, Carter was moved to HMP Cardiff, but the calls between him and Walker continued. The woman would eventually tell the police, "I've made a mistake. I've fallen in love with Daniel Carter. It's completely wrong." She was arrested, and at her home, officers found cannabis, which they determined was for personal use. Walker was the 18th guard to have been fired or arrested over developing relationships with inmates at Berwyn, contributing to the facility's reputation as Britain's cushiest jail. During the legal proceedings that followed, her attorney proposed that she'd been manipulated by Carter. The argument was that she'd recently been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, with experts assessing her as kind-hearted and caring but naive. In the spring of 2023, Walker received a prison sentence of 9 months, suspended for 2 years, and was ordered to perform 200 hours of unpaid work. Number 6. Jamie Melton. In the fall of 2022, a teacher at a private school in Tampa, Florida, was arrested for having relations with a student. 42-year-old Jamie Melton taught language and literature for the 10th and 11th grade at Carrollwood Day School, where tuition was a reported $20,000 per year. She invited the student to her home while her wife was out of town on September the 9th of 2022. They reportedly had relations on the teacher's bed and on her couch. Melton was friends with the victim's father, who subsequently discovered the illicit tryst and informed her wife before reporting her to the authorities. Melton had instructed the victim to delete their messages, but investigators were able to recover some which seemingly confirmed the relationship. In one message, Melton said she was hungry, and when asked by the student what she wanted to eat, replied, "You." After they'd been together, the victim also received a message from the teacher which read, "I'm falling asleep where we shared our intimacy." Melton was taken to Hillsborough County Jail and held without bond on a battery charge. Sheriff Chad Chronister condemned the woman's actions in a statement, saying she'd violated the trust which the community had placed in her. Number 5. Tishia Love Brewster. A 39-year-old correction officer at Downstate Correctional Facility in Fishkill, New York, was arrested in February of 2013 after it was discovered that she'd been intimate with an inmate. Brewster had worked at the prison for roughly 7 years, and it was suspected that she'd been involved with the man since 2010. They'd allegedly meet in his cell block during the officer's shifts, and at the time of her arrest, Brewster was 6 months pregnant with the inmate's child. In addition to official misconduct, the woman was charged with felony abuse due to the fact that inmates couldn't legally consent to intercourse. Number 4. Ravi Sathan. Australian man Ravi Sathan was dubbed Australia's sleaziest boss by the media in 2015 after he'd allegedly harassed multiple female employees and sent them messages which were characterized as lewd and disturbing. Sathan was the manager of Brisbane panel beater business Underwood Accord Bodyworks, and all of his victims were young blonde women. Some of the messages he'd sent them read, "I will kiss your body and make you happy. You will drive me mad," or "I can't resist that beautiful body." The women spoke to reports from A Current Affair and revealed troubling details about their former manager's behavior. 18-year-old Chloe worked at the company as a receptionist for roughly a month and quit after being relentlessly pursued by Sathan, whom she'd repeatedly turned down. While rejecting his advances, Chloe reminded the father of 2 that she was only 18. Sathan nevertheless sent her messages that included ordering her, "You have to be my princess," and asking her to be his personal exotic dancer. The man would also touch Chloe inappropriately, try to kiss her, and ask her to sleep over at his house. Another of the women who'd come forward, 19-year-old Caitlin, reported similarly disturbing behavior, highlighting that Sathan had sent a crude message to her boyfriend claiming that he'd had relations with her in a car and that staff members had filmed them in the act. Much like the other victims, 20-year-old Amber, who'd worked at the company for 3 weeks, claimed that she'd been left traumatized by her interaction with Sathan. Looking back on the experience, Amber said, "You're just thinking about when's the next stroke or touch." Sathan became the focus of an investigation by Queensland police, but upon being interviewed by a Current Affair reporter, he vehemently denied making anyone feel uncomfortable. Number 3. Russell Thorne, Christopher Bevan, and Simon Dykes. Started in 2006 and leading up to 2010, a prison governor and 2 prison officers were determined to have been at the center of what was deemed as a culture of corruption at Downview Women's Prison in Surrey, England. Governor Russell Thorne, aged 41 at the time of his trial in 2011, was involved in an intimate relationship with a female inmate for roughly 3 years. The unnamed woman and Thorne became close shortly after she'd arrived at the prison in July of 2006. The pair began flirting and Thorne eventually moved the woman to a wing of the prison where she enjoyed more freedom and was closer to him. Their physical relationship progressed from kissing to intercourse after Thorne had reportedly called the woman into his office and told her, "Open your legs, that's an order." They continued to have relations, and Thorne would give his lover various gifts and alcohol, in addition to granting her favors such as weekend releases. When the woman noticed that another inmate had piqued Thorne's interest, she arranged for her to join them in their tryst. Dykes was accused of having intercourse with 3 prisoners, touching a 4th, and performing an intimate act on himself outside another inmate's cell. Bevan was also reported to have been involved with 2 female inmates. The relations that had occurred between the prison staff and inmates were reported to have been consensual in nature, but were partly based on the women getting various perks in exchange. Thorne, Bevan, and Dykes were arrested and charged with multiple counts each of misconduct in public office, to which they pleaded not guilty. Updates on their cases indicated that Bevan, while heavily intoxicated, fell to his death at his home in Leith Towers, Grange Vale. The accident occurred on June the 6th of 2011, which was the first day of his trial. Thorne was jailed for 5 years, while Dykes faced a retrial as a jury failed to agree on a verdict. Number 2. David Thomas Solomon. While he was a teacher's aide at Falkville High in Alabama, Huntsville man David Thomas Solomon was accused of sleeping with a teenage student in the fall of 2015. Solomon, who was at the time in his mid-20s, and the student had been talking on Facebook for several weeks before she went to his father's home in Hartselle. They were reported to have had intercourse and deviate intercourse at the residence. Within several days, school officials and the police found out about the illicit relations. Falkville police questioned Solomon at his home, and he reportedly confessed to officers at the scene. Solomon's contract with the school was terminated in the incident's aftermath, and he was held at Morgan County Jail on a $5,000 bond. Our previous video about when hospital workers go wrong is coming up right after number 1. Stay put if you'd like to watch that one as well. Number 1. Autumn Wedgeworth. In the summer of 2014, East Mississippi Correctional Facility employee Autumn Wedgeworth was arrested for allegedly having intercourse with an inmate. The illicit affair involving the unnamed prisoner and the 33-year-old Meridian woman was discovered and reported by the Management and Training Corporation. The Lauderdale County Sheriff's Department provided no further information on the circumstances of the relationship or on how it had come to light. Wedgeworth was consequently charged with felony battery. She secured a $10,000 bond and was released from the Lauderdale County Detention Facility pending the legal proceedings into her case. Number 7. Jennifer Hall. In the spring of 2022, a former hospital worker was arrested roughly 20 years after allegedly administering a fatal dose of medication to a patient at Hedrick Medical Center in Livingston, Missouri, while Jennifer Hall worked as a respiratory therapist at the rural health care facility. From December of 2001 to May of 2002, there was an alarming increase of code blue patients who'd gone into cardiac arrest under suspicious circumstances. Of the 18 to have suffered sudden complications, 9 passed away, including 75-year-old Fern Franco, a wrongful death suit was subsequently filed by the families of 5 victims against the hospital, but the Missouri Supreme Court ultimately dismissed it, arguing that the statute of limitations had run out. The hospital, which was accused of covering up the incidents, fired Hall in 2002, a few days after the death of Fern Franco. Her termination was officially motivated by a past arson conviction, as she'd been accused of starting a fire at a previous hospital where she'd worked, and was out on appeal at the time of her employment at Hedrick. Hall was eventually acquitted of arson at a retrial after spending a year in prison. In the aftermath of Hall's termination, the Code Blue patients at Hedrick returned to historical frequency. An investigation was reopened into the suspicious deaths after it emerged that Franco had substances in her system that hadn't been prescribed by her doctor. The woman, who'd been hospitalized for pneumonia, had been injected with lethal doses of succinylcholine, a relaxant that paralyzes the respiratory muscles, and morphine. She fatally suffocated while still conscious. Nearly 2 decades later, Hall was charged with first-degree murder for the incident, but the authorities didn't disclose a potential motive or whether she'd face further charges as of the latest updates. Number 6. Aisha Basharat. On January the 24th of 2021, a hospital worker was caught on CCTV purchasing various items from a vending machine while using the bank card of an elderly patient minutes after she'd passed away. 23-year-old Aisha Basharat was at the time working in the COVID ward at Birmingham's Heartlands Hospital in England. An unnamed 83-year-old succumbed to her condition at 1:56 p.m. Within 17 minutes, Basharat was recorded making several contactless purchases from a vending machine. Upon returning to work on January the 28th, Basharat tried using the card once more, but by then it had been cancelled. The worker was arrested during her shift and initially claimed to have found the dead woman's card on the floor and that it had somehow gotten mixed up with her own possessions. It was revealed, however, that the cards were of different color and that Basharat had blatantly ignored the protocols regarding lost patient property. She went on to admit theft and fraud by false representation, for which she was given 5 months in prison, suspended for 18 months. Number 5. Waran Lee. A 44-year-old hospital theatre support worker was jailed for 2 years and 3 months in 2022 after being found guilty of gradually stealing the savings of a disabled pensioner. Waran Lee befriended Gerald Beach in 2006 while delivering his meals at his retirement housing complex in Aylesford, England. She went on to unofficially care for him for roughly 12 years, a time period during which the man's family claimed she took over one of his bank accounts and made withdrawals without his permission. As 83-year-old Beach, who suffered serious mobility problems, later told the authorities he'd allowed Lee to use his Nationwide account for various expenses. She was not, however, given permission to use his Lloyd's account, which the pensioner kept for rainy days. The woman somehow managed to obtain the PIN and made withdrawals at will, reportedly using the money during various trips abroad and to buy gifts for her family. A fellow retiree noted that Lee had a hold on Beach, and she informed social services that the caregiver was locking him in his home. As an official inquest commenced, the man discovered his Lloyd's account was virtually empty, holding less than $10. Between August of 2016 and June of 2018, Lee was accused of taking roughly $15,000 from him. She denied theft in court but was ultimately found guilty in April of 2022. Number 4. Stacy Hayes. Just before midnight on October the 4th of 2021, a nurse at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia gunned down a co-worker. 55-year-old Stacy Hayes emerged from an 8th-floor elevator carrying a handgun and ambushed Ann Ray James from behind as he sat at his workstation. 43-year-old James succumbed to multiple gunshot injuries in a local hospital. While wearing body armor over his scrubs, Hayes drove several miles in a U-Haul before he got out of his vehicle and discharged an AR-15 into the air. Law enforcement responded to reports of gunfire and that an armed man in scrubs was in the area. They found Hayes at the School of the Future at 40th and Parkside. where the hospital worker engaged them in a shootout, letting off at least 69 shots from his assault rifle. Arsenio Perez, one of the two officers injured in the fire exchange, was subsequently told he might never fully regain the use of his right forearm. Hayes was critically shot in the neck and upper body during the shootout, but he eventually recovered to face justice for his crimes. He pleaded guilty to charges including third-degree murder and in August of 2022 was sentenced to at least 35 years in prison, which, given his age, was likely a life sentence. Even though law enforcement believed James's killing had been targeted, no concrete motive was provided for Hayes' actions. During sentencing, he only spoke to express remorse for his crimes. There was speculation that the man's actions had somehow been linked to an earlier confiscation of the small arsenal he owned. Prior to the rampage, the Philadelphia police had confiscated a 12-gauge shotgun with 12 rounds, a Panther AR-15 rifle, and a Smith & Wesson pistol with 3 magazines and 39 rounds from Hayes. Under unspecified circumstances, he petitioned a judge for the return of his firearms, arguing that they'd been purchased legally and that he wasn't a threat. The guns were handed back to him in June, and within months, Hayes went on the shooting spree. Number 3. Nicole Lorraine Linton. While working as a traveling registered nurse, 37-year-old Texas woman Nicole Lorraine Linton caused a horrific traffic accident on August the 4th of 2022 as she sped through a Los Angeles intersection. Even though a light had turned red for an estimated 9 seconds, Linton barreled through passing traffic in Windsor Hills. She smashed her Mercedes into several cars at up to 90 miles per hour. A harrowing video of the crash was picked up by multiple media outlets and showed Linton essentially cutting through other motorists. 5 people died in the fiery wreck, including a woman who was 8 months pregnant. Linton, who was living and working in LA at the time, survived and was subsequently charged with 6 counts of murder and 5 of vehicular manslaughter. Court documents obtained by the Los Angeles Times detail that the woman suffered from severe mental health issues, which had begun to manifest in May of 2018 while she was studying nursing at the University of Houston, Texas. That month, in the midst of a panic attack, she began running through her neighborhood before eventually slamming herself against the hood of a police cruiser. She was arrested for disorderly conduct and, in the days that followed, told her family she was possessed by her dead grandmother. Linton was checked into a psychiatric hospital and diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Further incidents in the years that followed came to include self-harming behavior, a naked rampage through her neighborhood, and leaping from windows. In the hours leading up to the crash, she'd called her sister displaying similarly erratic behavior. After going home from work to have lunch, Linton FaceTimed the woman while fully nude and told her that hospital co-workers were acting weird. She returned to work and minutes before the crash, called her sister to say that she was going back to Houston to get married and that she should meet her at the altar. As of early September 2022, Linton was held without bail while her mental health was further examined. Her defense argued that she should be placed in a mental health institution, claiming that a psychotic break had rendered her in an unconscious state at the time of the crash. Number 2. William George Davis. In 2017 and 2018, multiple patients at the Christus Trinity Mother Frances Hospital in Tyler, Texas, started experiencing unexplained complications while they were recovering from heart surgery. As they examined their CT scans, doctors found that the patients had air in their brains. An investigation subsequently connected the suspicious deaths to former nurse William George Davis. In April of 2018, about a month after he'd been fired from the medical facility, the 34-year-old was arrested. He was the only employee consistently around each of the patients, and surveillance video showed him entering and leaving their rooms moments before they experienced stroke-like symptoms. Davis was accused of injecting air into the catheters of roughly 11 recovering patients, 6 of which passed away. While some of the deaths were harder to prove, he was ultimately convicted of 4: John Lafferty, Ronald Clark, Christopher Greenaway, and Joseph Kalina. During his trial, Davis's defense tried to argue that the hospital was making him a scapegoat, simply because he'd been around each person at the time of their death. However, the prosecution maintained that the incidents weren't accidental. As evidence, they presented the recording of a jailhouse call between Davis and his ex-wife, in which he'd claimed that he wanted to lengthen the time that patients spent in the ICU so that he could earn more overtime. The jury only deliberated for 2 hours before sentencing the former nurse to death on October the 27th of 2021. The decision was automatically appealed. Number 1. David Fuller. In 1987, 2 women were murdered several months apart in Royal Tunbridge Wells, England, in a case that subsequently went cold for roughly 33 years. Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce, aged 25 and 20 respectively, met their end in similarly gruesome fashion, as both had been beaten, abused and strangled to death. Nell was killed on June the 23rd, and her body was found by her boyfriend inside her bedsit after she'd failed to turn up for work. Evidence indicated that she'd been assaulted either as she was dying or after her death. Pierce was abducted from outside her Grosvenor Park bedsit on November the 24th, and her lifeless body was found in a remote location 40 miles away 3 weeks later. The investigation into the incidents, which would come to be known as the bedsit murders, saw little progress until 2007. That's when a review of DNA evidence collected from both crime scenes revealed that they'd been carried out by the same unidentified perpetrator. Then in 2020, a DNA match linked the Nell and Pierce murders to David Fuller, a local electrician in his late 60s. He was arrested, and a search of his home revealed further disturbing crimes. Law enforcement found several hard drives containing numerous photos and videos that showed Fuller abusing over 100 female corpses in hospital mortuaries. The desecrations were carried out while he'd worked as a hospital electrician from 2008 to 2020 at the Kenton Sussex Hospital and the Tunbridge Wells Hospital. He pleaded guilty to the charges stemming from the corpse abuse prior to the trial for the murders of Nell and Pierce. While initially chasing a plea of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, he eventually pleaded guilty to the double murder on November the 4th of 2021. Fuller was given a whole life sentence with a concurrent 12-year term for his desecration crimes, upon which the sentencing judge commented, telling him, "You became a vulture, picking your victims from among the dead." Thanks for watching. Would you rather spend a week in solitary confinement with your ex or drop all social media activity for a month? Let us know in the comments section below.